You were the first to say it to me. So this is one of the things. I don't want to distract from the meeting too much, but the I'm deeply aware. Like as I talk with some of my like trad five friends or mentors in the space, that it's we're not reinventing wheels here. There's some things, there's some novelty we have, but I feel very wary of the this is totally new. I think Ernest has said it really well that DAOs are co-ops, although it's different. We're
Yeah,
like, cryptocurrency
like trad.
is just like, capital, but there's difference through democratic involvement. Anyway, I digress. I digress.
Yeah, I mean, and Ernest keeps unmuting. I'm sure he's chomping at the bit. Feel free to interrupt us, Ernest. But I mean, where I see it is a reduction in trend. Again, this idea of reduction in transactional frictions,
Mm.
um, because most co-ops tend to be a little bit more rigid in terms of control and command and control issues. And I mean this in the following way that we sit down, we say, okay, how are we going to make our decision rules? And then it just takes if we wanted to change those, it would take some effort. You can build into a DAO the ability to change those vote weightings really easily. And I'm sure you could do that with a co-op, but real life is just, it tends to be, just a little bit more friction full as opposed to the DAO side. But Ernest, I'm going
Mm.
to call on you to to dispute me on that. Tell me in your co-op experience whether that's true or not.
Oh no, I mean I would agree in the sense that most co-ops don't know how to create tokens, right? So
Sure.
everything they have to come up with a business model first. They have to approach a bank first. They have to get a loan, and then they have fiduciary responsibility to usually a board of some sort.
Right. Right.
Um, and yeah, they're they're still using institutional models, but they've done things that nobody's yet to achieve in Web3, except for maybe on the bare blockchain layer. um, like Mondragon Cooperative is over 200 businesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have healthcare when they don't have layoffs, right? They reduce labor hours across the board, across different
Sure.
businesses, so they collaborate at a level that we've never even, begin, barely begin to thought of. You have
Yeah.
Parmesan Cheese, which is a federation of agricultural cooperatives across a region with their own brand. And so, I mean, I totally agree with you, which is why I'm like, man, as soon as Web3 understands cooperatives and cooperatives understand the tools in Web3, you have a real life Cambrian explosion of changing people's lives.
Yeah.
We're seeing
So
this. One of the first things that agricultural cooperatives share to reduce costs is financial infrastructure. That's
yes,
the
I agree.
number one.
Well, and it's not just financial infrastructure, it's risk sharing, right? I mean,
Hmm.
the danger of agriculture, and I don't know if I've talked about it here. I'm starting to get my class mixed up. Is when you have this boon of a crop, it lowers prices for everyone. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. And likewise, when everyone is struggling because there's been a drought and prices are quite high, no one has any crops to sell. And being able to manage that risk across a larger geography or across different crops is something that is important. I mean, that's why there's lots of problems with government um, crop insurance, but that's the good reason for it, is this trying to mitigate and spread this risk. But co-ops are great, especially with respect to agriculture and being able to spread both the financing costs and the risks
Hmm.
associated with it. The other piece I thought you said was interesting, I was going to comment on, is this idea. I don't think we've captured this idea of a fiduciary obligation very well in the DAOs, and that's partially because of the
Mm.
pseudo anonymity that we have. I mean, there's reputational risk, but we really don't have a true idea or both the conceptualization, but and certainly not in practice, this idea of a fiduciary obligation towards the DAO. I try to do my best to think in those terms, but it's not stated anywhere. And if I did something and said, well, that's just my decision, fiduciaries have real restrictions against their behavior where DAOs just don't have that, and that's probably a missing piece.
This is
For
so
some,
interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ernest.
yeah, for some, right? There's
Yeah.
there's this other thing about what makes DAOs unique, right? That we start off with decentralizing power, right? And in
Hmm.
particularly decentralizing power over others, and trying to break paradigms to break people free from their power under situations. And this puts a certain segment of our activities, or some organizations' activities, outside of what's called the box of allowable activism, which you could say is laws and regulations, right? Um, there's a civil disobedience level that's can be considered in some of what folks do. Um, and yeah, there's definitely, like, if you listen to a lot of the talks at ETH Denver, you know, there's people, are scared to be on, real life people have assets that, they don't want to risk because they're contributing to a community that all of a sudden finds themselves, needing to have some kind of fiduciary responsibility and didn't. And, so there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
fear and risk and disasters. While at the same time, there's like, we're building this infrastructure so that we don't need those risks or those laws and regulations.
Yeah.
Because,
Well, let me push. I mean, and I don't know the solution to this, but the problem is I think the 80-20 rule still applies, that 20% of the people, and the ratios are probably very different. 20% of the people are probably still doing 80% of the work. Um, One where I thought you were going to go with this is that you don't need a fiduciary obligation when everyone has their incentives aligned, right? Because the fiduciaries are automatically going to act in alignment with all the rest of the members. But when you have concentration of decision-making power, that becomes a little bit more problematic, and especially if you don't have your financial incentives right, which is why I mean, fiduciary obligations exist because of that conflict, right? My personal self-interest could differ from the interest of the co-op. So I need
yeah.
something to contain my behavior in that sense.
One of my new favorite mantras is assumptions are risks, right? And fiduciary responsibility is there to remove assumptions, right? Oh yeah, FTX, they're taking care of they're good. They're on the books. They're good,
Yes.
right?
Well, my assumption as an economist is everyone acts in their own self-interest. So there.
Yeah. And part of being in systems like we're in is, one of the permaculture principles that I love that we design from is accept or self-regulate and accept feedback. And part of this is like our own individual, responsibility to signal to our community, you know, um, our accounting, our tracking of what we do. We'd prefer if we all shared with each other a little bit of what we do so that we can all avoid, paying somebody to micromanage everything that we do, right? We just need to let the network know, hey, we're here, we're engaged, we're doing these things, we're here to help you out. Can I help you with any
Right.
requests? What do you need? That kind of self-report.
Okay. Cool. We probably should get started on Treasury stuff. And though that was, I liked that sidebar and I almost wanted to just keep going. But let's tear through some of the stuff here. Um, I'm kind of excited because in some ways I'm interested in not having an update, but setting our next goal because I think we're doing better with respect to our accounting. We're making real progress and kind of improving stepwise in that. Nikhil is not here to give us an update, but I feel like that's probably okay at this point. And for some reason, my screen is just turning, but I have posted the notes in the chat. So are there any updates to, I think there's a constitution update. I'm to just call on Sprinkles, and Sanad is not here. How's it going, Sprinkles?
So it's good. I'm not, I'm sorry, what do you mean by constitution
Did I
update?
lose everybody?
No, I think we're still there.
Uh-oh. Can you hear
Can
us?
you hear me?
I can hear you, Sprinkles. I can hear everybody. I think Rod may be having internet trouble.
Okay.
Or it's Discord.
I'm back. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes. Yep.
We can hear you.
When did I get rugged?
You said that you were happy to say that you don't have an update, and you called on Sprinkles for
Okay.
a Constitution update.
So Sprinkles, were you talking and I just couldn't hear you? How's it going with all the good Constitution stuff?
So we really don't have an update. Waiting for a poll to go up for the Treasury Constitution to be updated, unless we need to look at that and update again. I think actually you and I school should review it first. I guess
the poll of the Constitution, because we can happily report that we actually did read the Constitution and give comments.
Oh,
I think Grod, you and I should probably sync up on it and just do, because you added some comments, and then I think the thing that you were talking about, we should just double check, and then bring it forward. So I think of where the blockers still on that one.
Darn it.
I know.
And I'm writing Ernest in my notes, but it's not, for some reason, it's not updating. So. That is weird. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep going. Maybe I should refresh too. So is that with respect to accounting, then Iced and Grud will sync up. We'll get our comments in order, and then let you and Synod know when that is done, so you can take a look at them, and hopefully we can iterate this thing to finishing. Accounting working group. I'm sorry, investing working group. Is there a sort of a meeting that's taking place? Is there something that's going on with anyone that is in that interest group?
I think Nikhil's running that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed he had a meeting up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure who's running it. Possibly Nikhil, yeah, of course. Jenga and I were sort of, well, we're not quite sure how to approach this from a regulatory point of view. Initially, Jenga's idea was to come up with some kind of decision making from the DAO that we should, engage in this investment section. And well, it went back and forth, and then the idea was perhaps to just test run something here, which I don't mind in principle. I think that may be a good idea before we, go into regulatory sort of work, that we see what we can do here. But I do remember high school in particular that you had reservations of engaging in any kind of investment before the DAO gives the go-ahead. So I'm wondering whether the compromise couldn't be so that we've got a bit of both worlds. We could have a kind of temp check, see what the community says in principle about a kind of test run. And depending how that goes, we could do a test run. And then, if we see that works and so on and so forth, we are in a better position to make clearer recommendations of what we would like and how we would like it.
Yeah,
Okay.
my biggest thing is only is not like, it's just that, so now that we have the accounting done and like we have an eye on, I think Grod's framework applies right here. But the biggest thing for me continues to be just the government's or governance due process, and like, so that we come up with a strategy and then let the DAO know about it and let the DAO have a chance to respond. And so that Jenga proposed one idea, generate a risk framework that's that allows some free reign with it, like a subset of money. Sure, that's fun, and then like report back on it on the twice a season or something. And different, you can imagine any number of different routes of moving forward. I think the biggest like importance for me is just like that we raise awareness, one, in Treasury Department, two, at the DAO level, and then Snapshot will have to get involved at least to the movement of funds, like, whether that's to delegate it to the Treasury Department for people to act on it, or so like we can transact more quickly, or deploy it to the actual investment. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, that would probably be the end point then. By that time, if we talk about
Right.
movements of funds from the main treasury, not here our treasury, but the big one. Yeah, by that time we would need a framework in place. That is absolutely clear. I'm just wondering at the moment, we're just testing what we can do and what the best ways forward would be, and we need sort of in a little context. And for that, that would require funds probably from the treasury here, small ones, and what to invest in and how to, what the best way with the multi-sig is. So basically a testing ground, sandbox set up. And for this, I'm not sure whether we need more than a temp check at the moment.
Yeah. So let me react to a couple of first. I think we probably internally should determine what an appropriate budget would be and where to operate. If it's able to work on our tooling and be able to create some sort of reporting framework and decision-making framework, actually, actionable investments can proceed with. So we make those test investments and then we report back our results in some kind of reporting framework. All of those things I think I would agree with. And we need to probably lay those out even before we give some kind of proposal from the perspective of a temp check. And I would propose, and I know, Tessa, you're here, so I'm going to kind of call you out. I know you have an investment framework, and one that I would also, and Nanner, I know you also have some sort of, it's not really a framework, but written up sets of possible investments in a risk framework already. And then Ave's scorecard is always a decent starting point. So some combination of those would make sense for purposes of trying to say, here's what we plan on doing with the funds. And for the testing framework, I would imagine that we would want to test our short, medium, and long-term timeframes too. The long term's not going to be probably and that's going to be quite volatile. So who knows where it ends up? But I think we sort of run everything and see how things are going, make sure that we don't run into any issues. But that would be my thoughts in terms of starting to set up some goals for the investment working group. So, thoughts?
Interesting. No, that's good. I'm wondering, if one want, especially at the beginning when everything's unclear, we could pick something that is super safe, to do. Basically, not no risk. There's no risk. No, there is no risk. But one that is perceived as being so basically sort of solid, and that would I wouldn't probably want to engage in and that would probably rule out a lot of short-term things, perhaps sort of intermediate to long-term, where we know even if we don't engage so much, that's a solid investment anyway. So we can't do much wrong there. So the transaction.
I'll be honest. I'm less interested in. So hopefully the monetary amount is nominal enough that what we can concentrate on is our infrastructure and
that's why I'm
the investments. Well, the stability of the investment is less including our ability to test whether or not our decision-making framework works. Like if we say, well, I don't want to engage in high-risk investments, especially with low amounts of money, and then later we decide to do that, we're our investments. That's at least the beginnings of what we might want to do. And I don't know if people just think that's a horrible idea or not, but they should just kind of speak up and give some other thoughts.
It's you never have horrible ideas.
I wouldn't say that. So, I wouldn't go that far.
Every now and then.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's probably just we're basically thinking of the same. I mean, it's not. I don't think we disagree. I probably just thought at the beginning the problem will be speed. If we do something short term. That's that's the angle I'm taking at the moment. If we do something short term, we have to go in and out, and probably the higher the risk, the quicker we have to be able to react. We don't know how quick we are at reacting at the moment. We could be quick, but possibly not. But that's why I would have picked something where we are not forced, under normal circumstances, we have to react quickly, which means at the moment that would be something intermediate to long term. But I mean, one can do it one can do it the way you describe as well, of course, absolutely. I mean.
What I would recommend, I think the thing that I'm, so bump to Kraut's thoughts and yours too is Nanner's, but I think the biggest thing I'm most concerned with is like the framework and the methodology, like, and then from like as a beginning place of making decisions around this, and then to like we can take a small budget to limit risk and kind of do the sandbox model as you're talking about, Nanner, and then as we validate the thesis that we've got around some of these investments or the like, then we can scale or do whatever we want. But most important to me is kind of generating the framework and thesis around which we're doing this, and then like an appropriately diversified risk model, etc. And Tomahawk, I'd love to hear thoughts from you too on this, or Tessa as well.
I think we've already done a limited investment action successfully with our ETH, which has taken 10 of our ETH and given us some additional income. We can continue that. I think that's probably the quickest and easiest thing we can do absent a framework, because it's been successful before. The DAO has already approved it, and our ETH into our ETH probably pretty easily with another short thing. But in terms of the framework, I'd like to, I've been working on the investment policy statement a little bit, and I haven't seen too many additional comments on like what I've included. But I guess my thoughts there are, what are the categories of assets that we want to hold in the Treasury first and foremost? I mean, we already have a good blend of ETH, Bank, and a few other tokens. what should our target allocations to those types of tokens be? Like in terms of ETH, we should decide as a group how much of our treasury we want to hold in ETH and update that season to season, depending on risk, depending on the overall climate of what assets are doing in the space. We should be looking to over allocate to ETH or hold a large portion of our ETH during bear markets, and sort of wind down a little bit into stables as that ETH appreciates. So we need to have an approach that's that can change season to season, and we need to review our framework and adjust it, and make it a living document, not set it in stone or write up something and try to hold to that. So those are kind of my thoughts in the investment policy statement, and like what I wanted to set up as a structural thing is just the fact that we sit together as a group at least once a season, look at the allocation, and make a recommendation that adjusts our allocation closer to what we consider a target, in terms of the amount of ETH, and then maybe other layer one blockchains like Bitcoin. If we use WBTC, we could hold Bitcoin. How much of those versus how much bank versus how much stables, and then the fourth category is smaller cap DeFi stuff or DAOs that we partner with. We definitely want to have that in our treasury as well, and those can be strategic as well. We can make assets, or we can make partnerships with protocols that we think have investment potential, as a way to go forward. But overall, we want to keep track of the pie, in every aspect of the pie, and adjust it season by season closer to target. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about, but I welcome any thoughts.
I think those are good points, Tomahawk. When I deal with managing portfolios, basically there's limits onto what asset classes, or I can only have so much of my portfolio in ETH. I can have only so much of my portfolio in BTC, and there's a range on that. I can only have so many of my assets on certain platforms, layer one protocols. So that's usually how you kind of constrain it. I'm a hater of seasons because our seasons change in duration and they're inconsistent in time frames. So if you're really going to do this and you're going to have to compare your returns on a regular basis, seasons are definitely not the way to do that, because some seasons have 70 days, some have 90 days, some have less than that. So you can't compare your performance over an inconsistent time period. So I would recommend moving to at least quarterlies. Maybe you want to do monthlies. Also be careful of, I think, rebalancing too frequently. Crypto is very volatile. Oftentimes when you rebalance too frequently, you're going to actually anti-scalp yourself. So that's just something to consider of. When you're in our test portfolio right now, there's another thing to be concerned about is our transaction costs. You don't realize how much money you lose on a transaction cost. It could eat up your returns if you're moving in and out too frequently, and especially on a smaller size. As you scale, that's less of a problem because your returns are so much higher. So your performance on a test portfolio might not actually be indicative of what your returns would be on a much larger portfolio. So diversification when you're small might not be the greatest idea. So you might have to tone down your risk because you're dealing with a much more concentrated portfolio. Those are, I guess, my initial thoughts and recommendations.
Okay. I'd have to say I agree with all of those. The other piece I would add to that, and this is me sounding like a broken record, but on Tomahawk's point, we need to decide what our cost basis is, first and foremost, but then, like, as he says, what's our what is our measuring stick? Do we care about fiat at all? Often we do, especially if our cost basis is in fiat. Or are we trying to aim for our long-term assets to be appreciation in crypto itself as opposed to fiat? So those are a lot of, sort of kind of beginning decisions in terms of where we want to start. Tessa, did you want to comment?
Yeah, so if you use the fiat measuring stick as if this was a normal portfolio, you will rebalance into having a larger ETH position when the overall market is tanking, right? And because if you have a portion in stable coins, you would want to buy ETH when the ETH price is down, and conversely. So that's just a natural, I think, mechanism if you go against fiat to start.
Agreed with that sentiment. From my perspective, I look between the balance of Bitcoin and ETH, just my personal works, but that has nothing to do with what we should be doing as a group, because I have sort of fiat investments over on the side, and this is my crypto. But I 100% agree that if you base everything in fiat, which makes complete sense because we all have to pay for things in some form of fiat at some point, at least right now we do, then doing that would naturally allow you to accumulate crypto when its price is low. It sounds like people have been thinking really hard about it. Go ahead, Nanner. Sorry.
No, please.
No.
What Tomahawk, I mean, everything's right, but Tomahawk mentioned that the document has to grow. Exactly, that's the thing. That's also the problem, because that means we need the authority to do so. And I'm trying to tie this into this regulatory framework. How would one do this? That's why I would start off with small. But there's sort of a temp check, and then we start doing something, and we can work on all of these things and work them out. And then the next level, once that we reach the next stage, we can ask the community back on a forum post, and ideally we would have an umbrella authority at some point. What would be the best? We ask the DAO, okay, we want to do this. We delegate authority down to XYZ, and we have a supervisory body XYZ. And with the day-to-day dealings, we don't need to resort to any governance proposal because we have a system set up that deals with this, and there's a checks and balances. And in line with this, one would have the freedom to modify, because that's a technical issue, the risk framework. And that has to change, and the investment sentiment has to change, and possibly has to adapt as the environment adapts. And we need the flexibility so that we don't always have to, because something is not covered, an asset class is not covered, or an aspect is not covered, we have to always go back to the DAO and ask for permission, which will take us 4 weeks if we're lucky. That's what I would like to head for anyway at some point, an investment framework from the DAO.
So I suggested this in Upscale the other day. So instead of reframing like how to describe how you delegate authority to people, if we can describe the domain of decision making that's involved, and then we can, like you say, temp check and ask, the DAO, does anybody mind if this group makes these decisions, and if these decisions fall within the domain of this particular group, these investment decisions, and for certain types of decisions we may always decide to temp check with the DAO, like on the basic allocation of okay, 70% very low risk, 20% little risk, 10% get as risky as you want, so the DAO would agree on that percentage that we recommend, and then it would be within our domain to make decisions on how that pans out. And of course we want to report to the DAO, and always keep temp checks, but then that allows us to not have to always go to the DAO for proposals, but just, essentially a simple proposal that has some kind of framework that explains the risks, and how we suggest allocating risk, and then these are the decisions that we have the ability to make. And here's the multi-sig where the funds that we have decisions over sit, etc. So I've just found that framing to be more helpful in this environment than trying to set up like a governance framework for authority over assets.
I think
So like
sorry.
it's all good, Tessa.
One of my concerns is that we should have something run by legal. And the reason why I say this is that a lot of the examples that are given are, they have investment teams for foundations. And you will fail the Howey test if they feel that we are investing to increase the value of bank. Like that's an instant fail, right? And there is no entity right now for bankless DAO, which means we're all liable. So we're all liable for that SEC thing. It doesn't matter, if you're US or non-US, whatever. I think UkiDAO proved that they'll come after everybody. So, if you're going to do this, and you have to be really clear, and I think getting a legal temperature check or having some other separate entity do this is the way to go for liability for reasons. And yeah, that's just my concern.
I just want to second that. I mean, there's obviously best practices currently. The regulatory environment's changing, but and decentralization and how you structure it is important. And then to Tessa's point, it depends. Right now, as far as I know, there's no expectations that any of our efforts would ever kind of correspond to a residual value in bank. But that doesn't mean that there weren't statements that were made as such either in the past or might in the future that could all affect us. So it's super important to have a legal framework structured around where our guardrails are.
Does that mean, sorry, quick question for Tessa. Does that mean that if we were to enact some sort of a buyback program for bank where Treasury funds would be used to repurchase bank from the market, does that, in your opinion, constitute a failure of that Howey test?
No, buybacks are allowed, but the structure of the entity is something that's important for that. I think when you look at a lot of the different venture DAOs, because they're structured in a way where they're either member-only foundations or LLCs, buybacks are completely allowed. It's in your investment DAOs have to be really specific about this, where you're making investments not because, and people are participating not because they expect the token price to increase, right? They're participating for some other reason of some sort, for access to the deal flow, for education, all these other things that come along with it. And then if the value transfer includes a buyback, that is allowed. Like I think VC3 actually has a legal statement from a lawyer that specifically says that buybacks are allowed. For their entity structure, they're structured as a Cayman Foundation.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. I guess I kind of lost my point, but yeah, you wouldn't really expect, I guess what I wanted to say is you wouldn't expect necessarily that simply investing assets in the Treasury would accrue that those gains back to the bank token without a buyback or some other feedback mechanism to get it into the bank price, I guess is kind of where I was going with it. But yeah, that's good to know that we can enact a buyback and still be considered kosher, I guess.
Yeah, that was my kind of thinking too, or thinking about that is like can we avoid the conversation just a little bit, and hey, we're just a group doing investing with some DAO granted funds.
Well, so
Yeah,
this
at
is
the
my
moment, I think yeah, sorry, Ernest, getting
well,
ahead of ourselves
yeah.
a bit probably because I mean we're just talking about testing and seeing how the mechanics work. I mean, once we get to that level that Tessa is concerned about, I don't know. Of course, then perhaps one could think about more the regulatory issues. But at the moment, I think we're at this really nascent state of deciding about a framework and using a few bank to test, invest, and see what the mechanisms are. If we go too far down the rabbit hole here, the problem is that we won't do anything. I fear.
Well, so this is my question. Like, it seems to me, right? The reason why we're doing this is to provide information to DAO members so that we can all become better, um, more skilled in Web3. So in my mind, this is almost like a research project around investing because we do plan on reporting what we do. And if we just looked at our reporting as research, for DAO members and not investment advice to accrue value back to the DAO, token, then this creates a clear delineation. And then I'm curious if that essentially makes us like an investment club that's, we could always say our focus is on the research, since that's exactly what, since we're everything that we're doing, we're like, this is a test.
Yeah, my only comment would be, I don't think this discussion should preclude us from continuing to pursue the the research. There's a still is only illegal when you fire it up, right? It's not illegal to own a still. It's not illegal to have it full of stuff. But once you light the match, now you're illegal. There's probably, I'm not an attorney, and this is not financial or legal advice, but there's probably a similar situation for this, right? There should be no issues with doing the research, and there should be no issues with pursuing that research even prior to a legal opinion while we pursue that legal opinion at the same time. But again, that's not legal advice because I'm not a lawyer.
I think if you're going to clarify that this is for research, then a lot of the risk metrics kind of go out, right? Because you're just going to be doing it for limited scope in terms of like dollar amount, which is kind of not going to be affecting the Dow Treasury too much. So if that's the path, if that's initially what you want to say, I think actually having risk guidelines is not really necessary. But having that like decision making process, I do agree with Ernest. You're quite right on having that kind of scoped out for what it's worth.
I mean, Tessa, I would probably push back a little bit. If the point of the research is to say, well, let's develop a framework for somebody, either Bankless or anyone in the future, on how to manage these treasuries, developing the risk framework, even if there's no real money at risk, it's still super important. So what are you saying, just because it's not practical, we might not be thinking hard enough about it, or are you thinking about it in a different way?
If you're doing it for research in a small scale, like you can write down your risk metrics, that's fine. But at the end of the day, with I think dollar amounts that are relatively small, the concept of risk just isn't there.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, real money makes people act differently. That, I think that's your point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I agree with that. One, and again, not an attorney, but one thing that is fairly well sorted is investment clubs, and there are already Web2 online investment clubs. So there is a structure that could potentially act as a framework, even if it's sort of sections off from the DAO and creates its own funds to play around with. But that could be a thought. But again, legal needs to chime in, and I'm sure it's going to take them some time to get their heads around it. So I go back to my original point with Nanner, which is we probably have two tracks here, right? One is to develop a framework and think about how exactly we would propose something, and the second track is to make sure that it's compliant from a legal and regulatory perspective.
I have a quick question. Is there a bankless advisor here? Or bankless advisor project here?
Yes, there is.
Do we know that? Nothing to do with no relation though.
No.
Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's correct.
So let's go to next. Does anyone disagree with a parallel track? Does anyone here think we definitely need to get a legal opinion first before we can even begin talking about frameworks? Or is it possible? And I know that's sort of a legal question too, but you know, as a group, how do we want to pursue this? Do we want to get like a legal opinion light first, get the green light, and then move on?
No reason we can't do both in parallel. One thing that we could start doing immediately is categorizing the assets we have into 4 or 5 categories of asset types, and making maybe a template page for each asset that talks about its structure, its token amount, like the supply, the tokenomics it has embedded or whatever, maybe some price points, or I don't know what we would want to include, but
Sure.
I'm just thinking we would need like some sort of a template sheet that we can apply to all of our assets and like describe it in detail, why it fits with our mandate to own it or our mission, what the tokens are expected to do for us, maybe, and try to capture that in that template sheet, and then just work on categorizing and describing everything that we have now as a starting point.
I got you, Tomahawk. So usually what happens is you would do your buckets of risk and say, okay, these tokens are like your alt risk. They're in this bucket. This is your exposure to this, and this is your expected risk-adjusted return to it. So you're giving a little bit of a portfolio construction, and you want a certain expected return for your overall portfolio to be calculated from that. Is that what you were envisioning? Does that sound about right?
Kinda. I mean, just to get an idea of what our asset mix makeup is. I mean, we know how much ETH we have. We know how much bank we have. The others are just kind of like not even real appreciable amounts sometimes anyway. So that's kind of our 3 big pie pieces, I guess. But yeah, I don't know what we do in terms of how we talk about returns. I mean, I guess we would benchmark it against ETH or benchmark it against crypto total market cap or something like that to know whether or not you're under or performing. But yeah, I wouldn't even get into that yet until we know like what the pie makeup is, and then kind of talk about what we want it to be. And then once we get our pie where we want it to be, then it kind of seems like we can get more fine-grained and figure out what are the performances of each asset within the pie, and how can we maybe juice them a little bit better and move to assets which would do better for us. I don't know.
No. So you don't want to do it per asset. You want to do it per bucket, right? So you have your blue chips, your alt assets. Maybe you have one for your strategic partnerships, and you would do a risk-adjusted asset, which typically you would do a risk adjusted on a risk-free rate. Maybe that's versus a stablecoin rate that you want to say is your risk-free rate and that's what you kind of do. So that your altcoin bucket will have a higher risk premium, meaning that you need to have a higher return for the assets in those buckets. Otherwise, you're not getting compensated for the risk of holding those things.
You can now buy U.S. Treasuries on the blockchain, so there's your risk-adjusted rate.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
All right, we have 3 more minutes left. In the main question, can I just get like a show of hands or anyone that would veto a parallel research/legal track, a legal opinion first? Does anyone disagree with that? So investment research group would start with inventorying where we are, trying to develop the research framework, but not developing any opinions in terms of investments or theses. And then we probably do need someone to volunteer to work with legal to see what we need to do on that side. Is there anyone that wants to pursue that?
I can do that. I'm already in contact with a lot of lawyers. I think the question really is whether or not you're talking, like, which set of lawyers are you talking to? Are we talking to U.S. ones, or are we talking to non-U.S. ones? And our legal guild will not have a firm opinion because they are not our lawyers.
Sure.
They're not getting paid. They will never have a formal opinion.
I mean, maybe starting with the broaching the topic and seeing what questions we should be asking, right? I mean, I always, the end of every conversation or interview, I say, what are the questions I should have asked that I didn't, that I should have known, because I'm ignorant of what I'm ignorant of. So Tessa, will you at least start that conversation?
Yep, not a problem.
Okay. And then it sounds like, Tomahawk, that things are sort of moving forward on the working group itself to help develop some of these. Can you post, you probably already have a million times, but can you post the document that you're working with? Are we going to consider that sort of the framework document that we want to start with, or should we develop a different document?
I guess it's up for the group. I'll definitely post the edit link to the document in the tokenomics channel.
Okay.
Yeah, and I welcome comments about it. It has some additional work. I guess the latter half of the document is not really my stuff, but maybe Block Boy or maybe Ernest put some of this part in about approved strategies, prohibited investments, contract quality, diversification. I don't know how fine-grained we should get in this document. I do think we should talk about our allocation buckets and what constitutes each allowable type of investment, and then how we operate as a group, our governance kind of stuff, which I don't know that we've really talked about in detail as a group. So we probably need sessions weekly with the people that want to participate in crafting this document. And I don't want to get too prescriptive necessarily. I like the fact that we're a volunteer group and the people that show up get the work done, get remunerated at the end. It should be all kind of retrospective and not really have roles per se that can get us in trouble later. But we do need to put some parameters on how many, maybe how many people or the types of expertise. I know some of that is already in the document, but I question how prescriptive it needs to be, I guess, because we don't want to get into a situation where we don't have the elements that we need to move forward in any case. So yeah, it's going to take some work, and I guess a time that we can meet.
All right. Well, it is time, and I do want to respect people's time. They have places to go, but can we take it async? And I know the investment working group is, I believe there's meeting time, so I'll try to show up and just listen. And I don't want to drive the process, and I don't think it's my place to do so. But I'll try to show up and join in where I can.
What is the meeting time? I don't know. I'm not aware that we have one at the moment.
Nikhil, I thought, was planning one, but that again.
Okay.
So we'll have to just take it offline.
Right.
I'll try to post something.
Yeah, just
tag people. Okay.
I just confirmed Block Boy is the owner of this document, but I'm putting the share link into Tokenomics channel with edit rights.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
You. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.